Welcome back to The Advisor with Stacey Chillemi, where we turn insight into action. Now, I'm thrilled today to introduce you to Wayne Lee. He is a James L. Oliver Professor of Design and Engineering and Director of Design Block at Georgia Tech and author of Design Empathy and Contextual Awareness. Now, Wayne, welcome to the show, and I am so excited to have you here. I had a great conversation right before the show, and I want you to tell everybody a little about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Stacey. It's a pleasure to be here. Lovely. I love to have the conversation with you. A little bit about me. Yes. My name is Wayne Lee. I'm the Oliver Professor here at Georgia Tech. I teach both in the schools of industrial design and mechanical engineering. My background, a little bit, right? The son of immigrants, and my mom was a classically trained brush painter from Taiwan, and my dad, also Taiwanese, was a PhD polymer chemist. So I had a lot of art and science background
Mhm.
coming back. As far as education, I mean, I wasn't always a professor. I have 4 degrees, but I mean, that's not really that important. One's in fine arts, two are in engineering, and one is in transportation design. But prior to getting into academia, I worked at design firms like IDEO Product Development. I helped design cars for Ford Motor Company and Volkswagen. I was in the creative department at Pottery Barn, which is part of the Williams Sonoma Company, doing housewares and furniture and interior design. So long history of designing products and services for people. And then as far as education, like I said, wound up going to Stanford University and helping to create this idea called design thinking or human-centered design. And that kind of pedagogy I've been teaching for the last decade and a half. So this book is kind of the culmination of that decade and a half of teaching.
I love that. Now, let's get to the terms. When it comes to empathy, what do you mean?
Yeah.
What's the useful definition of empathy?
Sure. So we have to first, I mean, there are a lot of people, social research in this space. I'm sure if you've seen Brene Brown and TEDx talks and things like that, this idea of empathy it's threefold actually, right? One, it's not compassion, right? It's different, right? Um, Empathy is there are 3 components to it, right? One is cognitive, right? So, if you say I'm using an empathetic mind, it's a certain mindset, right? There's certain areas of the brain that kind of deal with empathy. And so the
Yes.
first one is cognitive, which we would consider perspective taking. Can you understand from another person's point of view what it is they go through, what it is they do, what factors influence their life, right? And so that's the cognitive part. The second part of that would be emotional, right? So that's almost as if when you deal with another person, their emotions become contagious, right?
Right.
If they are angry, you become angry as well. Like you can feel what they feel. So there's the
Yes.
cognitive aspects of empathy, and then the emotional aspects of empathy, right? And then lastly, that third component is what's called empathetic concern, right? So this is where kind of that the idea of cognitive, emotional, your compassion bring you to act, right? Bring you to saying that we have to do something about this. And now you can imagine like if you're a first responder and your emotional empathy overwhelms you, you can't do your job. It's the same thing if you're a doctor, right? They have to keep some distance, right? But they can't have zero empathy for you. They need to understand that you're making a tough decision about the medical circumstances in your life. But if they started crying with you when they gave you a cancer diagnosis, that would you wouldn't see them as professional. And so part of this empathetic concern is being able to now hold those 2 concepts right in check while
Mhm.
also being moved to act, moved to help. And so balancing those 3 is what we're talking about is empathy. So when we're talking about designing empathy into your life, how are you able to use those mindsets in your work, right? My book and the research talks about 3 mindsets for anyone who's considering, like, who's the audience for that? Creative professionals, design students, entrepreneurs, inventors. Maybe you're a mid-level manager looking for a way to reinvigorate your team, creating, um, this book is pretty much will describe and help you with tools on your empathetic mindset and then the other 2 mindsets, the creative mindset and then the critical mindset. So those are all different neural networks or different areas of the brain that kind of trigger. They don't fire at the same time. So your ability is actually switching between these frames of mind. Can you be empathetic and then switch after and become creative and then be critical and vice versa, right? Can you switch quickly and fluidly between these three mindsets? But that's where the empathy part comes in. Can you balance those three components? Um, it's funny because like some of the tools we think about, like one of the tools I wrote down is method acting. How might you use your own experiences, your own sense memories to trigger the episodic part of your brain, right? That remembers episodic things and trigger yourself so that you can get into an emotional state similar to who it is you're empathizing with. Method actors get this called getting into character, right? And so part of that is, that is one technique out of many in the book. But the idea is that if you need to understand someone, how do you really become them? How do you really see it from their side? And that's
Yeah,
really helpful because if you don't like, you don't always know who your customer is. And so
right.
knowing your customer is going to be really key.
Oh, I agree. Now, what's a moment when empathy saved a project from building the wrong thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these really interesting, concepts, right? I mean, one things I can think about, right? There was one of my mentors in life was David Kelly, and so he was the founder of IDEO, a product design firm, and he talked about empathy for an MRI machine, right? Now, and this was an IDEO business case. I used to work there. And of course, like they were like the technology itself was amazing, right? Like you can put someone into a giant tube and they use
Yeah,
magnetic resonance to like image your brain, see different things. And so like, for that company, right, to create that machine, it's beautiful technology. Like it'll save lives. But
yeah.
nobody wanted to get in the thing, right? Because it's scary. It makes loud noises, especially
Yeah,
children, right? So if a child has, a brain cancer, they're already scared enough as it is. They wouldn't use the machine, right?
yeah,
Like 90, like, I can't remember the exact figure he gave. I don't want to quote you wrong, but it was something really bad. Like, 70% of people will not use the machine. So, so you have this wonderful technology. We know it can do things like scan for cancer, but no one wants to get into it. So, um, so what did they do? Well, they empathize. They're trying to get into character, trying to understand. Like you're going into some intimidating tube. It's going to make loud clanking noises. You're not allowed to wear any metal. Like they do all the scanning before you can get in. So it already is intimidating, and you're in a hospital.
yeah,
So at the end, what that manager for the medical device company did was like, once they got into character, they go, well, how do we make this fun? How do we turn this into something else? So they wound up like painting the walls, like, oh, imagine you're an astronaut, and now you're getting into a space tube or something like that. And then they would paint it a different way. They would dress up the kids. The entrance of the machine would now look like it's a torpedo capsule or something for like the Star Trek Enterprise or something. And so now the kids look at it and go, "Oh wow, this is something I can do. This is something I want to do." And then
right.
they can also say, "Well, you need to hold really still, and it's going to be loud noises. That's because the ship is big." And so they can explain something very complicated in a way that a child will understand. And then their
Right.
take rate increased like double fold. Like it went from whatever it was, I can't remember on the top of my head, but I want to say it's like 70 to 90% not take rate to pretty much like 2%, like 98% of the people took it. So
Yeah,
something like that, where empathy can help make a product better, but more importantly, it can also stop you from making the wrong thing, right?
yeah,
You know, there might be things where, I think of some examples where someone created I think it was called the Life Straw, but and again, I don't want to cast aspersions, but it was something that it was meant to filter water for humanitarian design, right? And I'm sure it's been reappropriated now, but I think it's successful now. But they would say, well, how would say a rural Kenyan villager drink water? But they used an American context, like you would drink water out of a straw.
yeah,
Well, no, that's not how Kenyan villagers get water. So try
right.
to like you want to imagine someone using a straw on a, on an African plain where there might be predators around, bending over into a river, drinking water out of a straw. That's not how they do it,
Yeah.
right? They're going to collect water in a different way. So if you're trying to purify water, you would want to use the vessel or the jug of how they want to collect and filter water. You would want
Right.
not using them. You would not use want to use the wrong cultural paradigm to
Yeah.
force. They won't adopt it. So that was
Yes.
one thing I remember seeing a business case for. But and I'm sure it's successful now because I think they reappropriate it for like camping, for like extreme camping for the REI crowd, right? So I think
Yeah.
they're fine, right? But I think that's one where if you're empathetic first, you don't make those mistakes by trying to inflict technologies on people. You actually
Yeah.
find the human activity and then you try to improve upon it with the appropriate technology. And
Right.
that way adoption starts from the beginning with
Yes.
human need and human market.
I love that. Now, your book talks about the frames of reference. How does that switch in frames change decisions?
Yeah, no, that's so this is always the fun part about that. Y- So we talked about these frames of mind, right? These
Hmm.
references are, are you using an empathetic mind? Are you using critical or creative thinking? Now, if we talk about emotionally, when you're in a creative mode, you're more positive than negative, right? If we think about cognitively, if you're like, hey, anything goes, let's just make ideas. You're in a playful mood. You're feeling silly. You trust other people. You engender and entrust people with power to come up
Yeah.
with ideas, right? It feels positive, right? If you're deciding, I've got these four different options, which one is the
Yeah.
customer going to like the best? Well, now you can be critical. And now
Right.
that is, well, this one is best for speed. It only takes 3 steps to do it. But this 20-step thing over here is more engaging. The customers like playing with it more. So now, well, which quality? Do I go for speed or do I go for experience? Do I go for cost or do I go for strength? Like now you can be critical when you
Yeah.
have something that you want to engage people with, right?
Right.
And so the fun part about design, and then when again, I always say this, Stacey. I mean, people go, well, Wayne, you're an industrial designer. I'm a computer scientist. I go, no, no, no. Like, just like everyone is a little e engineer,
Hmm.
everyone is a little a artist, and everyone's a little d designer. So I'm using that definition. I'm not using fashion design or graphic design or, industrial design, even though that's why I teach. I teach product and industrial design. But everyone's a little d designer. I don't care if you make eggs, an omelet, for your roommate in the morning, you're an avian culinary designer. Like you're an ACD, right? Now, what makes you now what makes you a capital ACD is if you go to the Cordon Bleu and study breakfast pastries. Like then you have a degree in it. You're a capital ACD, not a lowercase
Right.
ACD. Now, what makes
Hmm.
you a 5-star Michelin chef is how well you practice,
I love
right?
it.
So think about those in those 3 steps, right? If you're a little d designer, and everyone is, then how do you go about your life, your process, right? Being empathetic to understand people and the context within which they do things, being creative, switching reference modes, and then being creative, being playful, improvisational, working with others who have different skill sets than you, right? Surrounding yourself with people that are different and that have those different disciplines or skill sets or points of mind with that customer. And then once you create the product or service or whatever you think you are making, and again, I use product very loosely too. I don't use product like that's a widget, right? I use product like this is any product of your imagination. So if you're making hardware, software, a book, movies, interpretive dance, it doesn't really, a public policy, it doesn't matter. It's a product. It's a little p product, right? So it's a product of your imagination. And once you have that product, how do you instantiate it? How do you
Yeah.
bring it to life? And you might want to bring it to life in different ways. There's so
Mhm.
many ways you can make something, right?
Yeah.
And then when you have that thing, now you switch to criticality. I have these 15 things I'm testing with my user, with my customer, with my audience. Which ones do they respond to? Which ones do they resonate with? How do I very quickly understand that feedback and then go at it again? Right? Because once you test it, you have new empathy. You know them from a different way because they use the thing in a different way.
Right.
Probably the different way than you intended. Right?
Mhm.
So those mindsets, to your point, Stacey, are you able to switch quickly, fluidly between these three? And the science is difficult because as people get older, they feel comfortable just thinking in one way, right? That
Yes.
like Scott Taylor, who I interviewed in this book, talked about they're like negative, there's like negative and positive poles. They're on two different poles of the earth. So
Yeah.
let's say you studied something highly technical, right? Let's say it's, chemical engineering. Well, that discipline itself uses a lot of scientific method, and there's a lot of criticality in its discipline. They don't make you study chemical engineering by doing an interpretive dance. Like they don't do that. They don't do that, right? So in that sense, right, you don't go, I'm going to study the molecular structure and I'm going to do it through interpretive dance, right? You don't. You just go,
Right.
look, these are the four carbon atoms. Here they are. Da da da. Memorize that. Da 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 da. Here's the rules on how they work. So it's very critical. And so there are disciplines out there, engineering, hard sciences, that use more rational approaches. They just use, less intuitive approaches. Whereas, if you think about like the fine arts, they're going to use more intuitive approach. Listen, I'm going to draw this, and it's just going to feel right. I'm going to think about what this idea. I've got this something. I've really got something burning I want to talk about. This is the story I'm trying to create. This painting is about my journey through something, something, something. Like,
Yeah.
my journey through addiction through cats, and then so I'm going to just draw cats, right? Something like that. So it's much more intuitive that way. And so in that sense, design straddles both. How are you able to understand these two different references? A more
Hmm.
intuitive approach with a more free-flowing idea mindset, both emotionally, cognitively, and body hormonally, right? Versus
Yeah.
something that is more critical, right? A
Right.
little bit more what Scott would say the negative emotional attractor, right? And so
Yeah.
these two poles, once you get comfortable, when some people don't like to ever shift. So the
Yeah.
whole goal for me, and again, this comes from my upbringing because I have an artist mom and a scientist dad, is to
Yeah.
say, how are you quickly, fluidly transitioning between these three mindsets? And when do you know when to use which tool? There are methods you can practice. I teach a
Yeah.
class called Design Research Methods, and think
Hmm.
methods like method acting, field
Right.
observation, how to interview people. Those are
Hmm.
things that are like that. Interviewing people is in the social sciences. It's both psychology, sociology, and journalism, right? Those
Right.
disciplines teach you how to kind of understand and talk to people in a way where you can get their story without flavoring their story, right?
Right.
So those can be used in an empathetic mindset. So I teach methods about how to utilize those within those three frames of reference and
Hmm.
and hopefully as people go about their business, like go about doing their lives, right, they would be able to diagnose or look at and go, I've been banging my head against the wall being critical for the last 4 days. Maybe this isn't the right approach. Maybe I
Right.
should empathize with someone. Maybe I should talk with someone. Maybe I should bring someone in who hasn't seen my problem yet and really kind of just improvise with them, talk through that, and then be in the moment. And that maybe that new perspective will give me something new, right? So
Yes.
trying to understand what is the next step for you
Hmm.
in your I mean, this is called design process or design methodology, right? And design thinking deals with these phases of design process, and
Yeah.
that so knowing when to transition and what to do as you approach a problem is always key. Yeah.
Now, give us a 2-minute method from raw observation to actionable insight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is always fun because there's so much, right? One, one quick 2 minute method, right? There's in this book, right? There is something called an empathy map, right? So
Mhm.
when you talk to someone, right, if you've got notes or a little notebook, or I mean, or you're recording it, you may want to go back and watch the recording. Uh, an empathy map is a quadrant. It's 2 by 2. It's 4 quadrants. And what you would do is go, okay, you can record on the left hand side, there's say and do. You can record what people are saying and what they're doing, right?
Right.
Through either a video camera, whatever, right? Even in your notes, you can write down what someone is saying if you're interviewing them. You can write down what
Yeah.
they're doing, right? And that's usually what's called explicit knowledge, right? You can record it, it's concrete. Now, I talk
Hmm.
about this idea of concrete versus abstractedness. So the other side of the empathy map, if say do is on the left-hand side, one in each square, then the right-hand side is think feel.
Hmm.
This now requires your interpretation. Based on what they're saying and doing, what do you think they're thinking and what do you think they're feeling? And now
Right.
this is your empathy. Can you get into character? Now, you may be wrong, and that's okay. But the whole idea is to even at least venture
Yeah.
a hypothesis on what you think they're thinking or you think they're feeling, right?
Hmm.
So that's the method. So that was your first question, right? And now, of
Yeah.
course, the right-hand side is not explicit, it's called implicit. It's
Right.
unspoken. It's the hidden emotion behind what they have. They don't tell you how they're thinking and feeling. That's what they're thinking and feeling. You have to actually guess it. You have to empathize it, right? You have to empathize with them and guess it. Now, here's the interesting thing. You can always create something and validate whether or not your hypothesis is right,
Yeah.
right? So if you build something to help improve their situation and you triggered the thinking or feeling, you would know because they would react to it. Now,
Hmm.
here's like you said, the 2 minute, there's the method. That's the 2 minute to synthesis. What's the thing that you get there to the strategy? What I
Yeah.
often tell my students, and I I do consulting work and executive education, so I've trained executives and things like that, right? Um, is do you notice a conflict between what someone says and someone does, feels, or thinks? If they
Yeah.
tell you something and do the opposite, or they do something and feel really bad about it,
Hmm.
therein lies what we call a cognitive dissonance, a cognitive bias. They're rationalizing their behavior. Something is wrong. Something is uncomfortable. And if you see a contradiction between any one of the four quadrants, that now leads you a strategy. So you now go, how do I make this person's life more consistent in that way? If they
Hmm.
steal something to feed their kids, right? There's a contradiction between what they're feeling, they feel bad about it, but they have to
Yeah.
do it. They
Hmm.
have to do it. So now the question is, what will you create that stops people from stealing food to feed their kids?
Yeah.
Right? So if that's that idea, and again, that's obviously a pretty extreme example, but if you take that idea of an empathy map, say, do, think, feel, and then you try to understand where the contradiction or where the difficulty in lies, there is your opportunity from a human-centered design standpoint of something you can solve.
Right. Oh, I like that. It seems like empathy helps us and makes better choices in our life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Like let's think of it from a business standpoint. If we talk about context, my when I talk about context, we're talking about do you know everybody in your supply chain? Do you know everybody in your logistics? Like, how are you going to sell this thing? Who are you going to sell it to? Who are you going to sell it to? That's the empathy part. How you
Yeah.
sell it to people, that's the contextual part, right? Most
Yeah.
startups don't have the resources, right,
Right.
to just start creating 100,000 of something. They
Yeah.
need to understand their supply chain. They need to understand their manufacturing base. They need to understand their marketing base. And so they need to build to that volume over stages. All startups are staged with their
Yeah.
finances. If you empathize with your supplier, your distributor, your venture capitalist, now you
Yeah.
begin to understand from their point of view how you should accentuate and go to market with your startup company,
Right.
right? Because it can be really tricky. Sometimes, like I've been in a few startups in my life, and some of them have exited, which is always nice. But the idea is right. Um, you might have, like, say, in your stakeholders, two suppliers. But those two,
Hmm.
and like this is something I learned at Ford. If you have two suppliers, you can pit them against each other, right?
Yeah.
Like he's like, I have two tire suppliers. Like Ford might use Michelin and Continental, for example. Well,
Right.
now you can like go, well, Continental's going to give me a better deal on these tires for this Ford, for this Ford F-150. What can you do, Michelin? And so now you get your cost savings. Now,
Right.
as a startup, you may not have that benefit. So if you go from your supplier, you empathize when they go, well, we'll supply you our electrical connectors for your widget, but
Hmm.
you will not be able to use anyone else but us. They've
Yeah.
effectively monopolized you and your
Right.
startup. So if you empathize with them, you go, wait a minute, does this person really have my best interest at heart or
Right.
their interest at heart? So then
Yeah.
you would probably not want to sign that deal, right? If they go, hey, we're gonna give you the first 1,000 parts for free, but in
Yeah.
return, you can only use us.
Right.
Well, you empathize with them. They want to earn money.
Yeah.
And but you also understand where they're coming from. So that would
Right.
inform you that, hey, maybe I want to have a second supplier here. Now, what
Yeah.
you want ultimately is that both suppliers are successful to
Hmm.
create a positive relationship. So that means you understanding how much volume you can throw their way, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we call this kind of contextual awareness, understanding the context within which you create, right? Making a medical device in rural Kenya is going to be way, way different than making it in Boston next to MIT, right? Like it's just not going to be the same medical device, right? It's
Yeah.
just not. So because the audiences are different and the way it's built is going to be different.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, listeners were promised 5 concrete plays. So, Wayne, what are those 5 for the next 7 days?
Yeah, no, that's that's always tricky. So one, all right, I've got three for sure. I'll
All
invent two,
right.
right?
Okay.
One, I write in the back end of my book some three keys because a lot of students do ask me, Wayne, how do I do what you do, right? You've been
Yeah.
able to design race cars for Ford Motor Company as a Ford GT. You've been able to manage, to help create products for the home and work with really interesting people. And I go, well, one, live richly, right? With empathy, right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean you have to travel halfway around the world, right? It doesn't mean you need to like, oh, I just got to go to another country. You
Yeah.
can find it. You can live richly by walking across the other side of the city, right?
Hmm.
You can find ways to empathize with people just by finding a different neighborhood, right?
Right.
And so, so living richly, yeah, I mean, I wrote about this in the book. One of those formative experiences for me as a young person, as an art student, an engineering student, a person had asked for me for some money when I was
Hmm.
getting out of a coffee shop. And instead of just like either brushing them off or giving them $1, I said, oh no, let me sit down with you
Yeah.
and just talk with you. And
Right.
I learned so much. That person who was houseless, not necessarily homeless, but
Yeah.
houseless. I
Hmm.
learned about his life story. I learned about how he came about to be where he was. He was an aspiring high school athlete, and one unfortunate injury changed his entire life.
Wow.
And at the end, we talked about, and that's one of those things emotionally for me. I still even think about that is one of the emotional triggers I use when I want to understand people, right?
Yeah.
If I need to understand what it's like to from that person's point of view and how precious life is and how things
Yeah.
can change in an instant, and I need to get
Right.
into that character, I trigger that. So
Right.
living richly, definitely one. Find people
Hmm.
who are different than you. Find ways to be with them, not judge them, not criticize them, just be with them. And then
Right.
that will help you understand them, right?
Yeah.
That's one. Second, the context, see the meta, right? The meta
Yeah.
context is when you do something, why are you there? Why are you there to do it, right? Take a step back, breathe, and go,
Yeah.
is there another reason why I need to do this? If you're in college, why are you there? It's not just to ace the test. It's not just to get an A. Why are you there?
Right.
And if someone says, well, I'm there to get a job, okay, well, why are you there to get that computer science job?
Yeah.
Right? And if they go, well, I'm here so that I can, become a software engineer and make money for my family. Okay, well, then that's a reason. That's the meta reason for why you're in college. If it's,
Right.
I want to create that next algorithm that will change how businesses find their resources. Okay, great. Then that's why you're there. See the
Hmm.
meta, see the reason behind why you're there or why you're doing it. Right? So
That.
go through that abstraction process where you're asking, what is the meta context? Why am I doing this?
Right.
Um, and thirdly, the last one is stay creative, right?
Hmm.
Creativity, unfortunately, and I think in education has taken a real backseat to all the
Yeah.
other STEM fields, right? There is an A in STEAM, but STEM tends to ignore it.
Yeah.
So, and being like I said before, my mom being a classically trained artist, it's it's kind of saddening to see that because that whole other side, the creative, the intuitive, the improvisational, the performance, the
Yeah.
audience, all of those types of ideas in art and art related things, right? Making are so critical to how you'll become successful, right?
Yeah.
So whatever you do, be inspired to do it and create new ways of doing it.
I love
So
that.
if you're a poet, find new ways to mix language. If you're a computer scientist, look at different computer languages and see
Yeah.
how they compare to each other. Learn a new language. Stay creative, right? In the way in which you do things. And
Yeah.
so that's those three. Now you asked for two more, so I got to figure out the other one. Okay. Um, one, what I will say is um, when when you're building a team, right? Make time for diversity and different ways of thinking, right?
Right.
Um, know that a good idea can come from anyone in any place and
Mm-hmm.
foster that. Being a
Yes.
good leader is about empowerment. It's,
Yes.
it's about knowing that you're not always and seldom are you really the smartest person in the room.
Right.
You surround yourself with good people.
Yeah.
Um, and then what you do is you help facilitate, you coach, you mentor, you help facilitate dialogue. And what
Yeah.
that does is now those ideas come from anyone. And now you're able to leverage those ideas because we all have a North Star. Your idea of leading is inspiring people to follow a North Star. But the
Right.
idea of leadership in that situation, of course, also is that group of people you've assembled,
Mm-hmm.
right? That makeup of people is is paramount to your ability to get there. You can't get
Yeah.
there without them. So in
Right.
that sense, I would always say empower your culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, last statement, right, is just remember like this fifth point of view. Remember your frames of mind. Remember we've talked about empathy, creativity, and criticality, and
Mm-hmm.
realize that these don't fire at the same time, right? These are different neural networks or different areas of the brain that fire, the neurons, they fire. And so if you can't fire and you can't be critical and creative at the same time, so
Yeah.
you have to make space in your process, in your approach to be able to
Right.
switch fluidly between these three areas. And so if you just say, be mindful of your mindset, you can always
Mhm.
improve upon it. Your
Yeah.
development process, your design process is a living thing. I always say design is not a discipline, it's a lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
You wield this like if like I said, if you're making eggs for your roommate in the morning, you're an avian culinary designer. So
Yeah.
how might you go, well, what does my roommate like to eat? How many different
Right.
ways can I make eggs? And then if
Yeah.
I test two or three different ones with them, what's their feedback? Sooner
Yeah.
or later, you can be a cordon bleu chef if that's your process, right?
Right.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that. That's awesome. Now, tell everybody again the title of your book
sure.
and what you want people to really get from this book, why the purpose you wrote this book, and where they can find it.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. And again, thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I mean, the book is called Design Empathy and Contextual Awareness. It is on Amazon right now. It dropped September 2nd. Um, you can find me on Amazon.com. Just type in my last name or just type in my name, Wayne Lee, last name spelled Li. So Wayne
Mhm.
Lee, and then type in Design Empathy. It should be the first thing that pops. So that's a way to buy the book. My our website, as far as my lab or my initiative on campus, is called Design Block without the K. So
Mhm.
DESIGNBLOC dot, and we're at Georgia Tech. So it's GATECH, Georgia Tech dot edu. You can find me there if you want to connect to me. We have a little email line that goes to my public relations officer. And so in that sense, if people want to get a contact of me, they can go to the Design Block, click the link, and they can find me through that. The book, like I said, as far as you mentioned, the book's intent, if you're a creative professional, a young
Mhm.
design student, an
Yes.
entrepreneur, or anyone who is in charge or thinking of creating new experiences, products, and services for people, right?
Yes.
This book is probably for you, right? This book is about that warm, fuzzy front end of how do I actually understand and
Mhm.
then cater to a human context, a group of
Right.
people, a market, right? And so this is really that book on what do I do in that front end, right? There are other things I will teach, maybe it's a subsequent book for about how to make stuff that then
Mhm.
has successful. This is really more how to understand and people and to understand business process, right? You understand your environment and and how you'll go about making the product and service. So it's not necessarily like how to make software, it's how to understand the market that's going to use your software.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I love that. Now you're also on LinkedIn. People also can find you on LinkedIn as well.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. You can type up Wayne Lee and just say my name on LinkedIn, right? I am on LinkedIn, Instagram. I think I go by Wiley Coyote, WLICOYOTE. And so I'm on Instagram as well. But yes, feel free to connect into LinkedIn, and happy to converse with people who are interested in that. There are avenues if you're looking at executive education for that as well. We do that through Georgia Tech. Um, but there are a lot of ways in which we can get connected that way. Yes.
I love this. Empathy isn't niceness. It's a decision to fuel. It's really to analyze the area and to understand and keep the discovery alive, which
Yeah.
I love, and that's exactly what you were discussing today. And I really enjoyed this a lot. I think it's a great way to like look at the different aspects of taken empathy, and you can actually use empathy as a source, to kind of
Yeah.
help you excel in any areas of life,
Yeah.
in business, in your industry, and your work life, at home,
Yeah.
really. And you, if you take the concept and you really break it down the way you were talking about it, about the creative and the critical, and how, and the cognitive and the emotional and aspect, and the concern of it, all these aspects, if you break it down and you use them properly, it really could help you in almost anything, really.
Stacy, I could not, I mean, 100% I could not agree with you more. I mean, the fun part about that is what makes me happy to be a human-centered designer is working with people inspires you, right?
Yeah,
And that's the whole fun part. Sometimes people get so bogged down. I teach at a technology institute. Sometimes they get so bogged down and enamored with technology, they forget who they're designing it for. And
yeah,
so it's that first engagement. It's that like, I made this thing. Do you resonate with it? Do you like it? Tell me how you feel about it. Show me. And that whole like that's an artist engaging with their audience. And
yeah.
that there's nothing more charging when someone's like, wow, I love this. Like take my money kind of thing, like a Futurama, take my money kind of thing. But more importantly, it was this changed how I live,
Yeah,
and for the better, like that power, that ability to connect with someone and see the changes in their lives. I mean, as an industrial designer, we make things that are mass produced. We're
yeah,
changing things on not just a human scale, one to one, but remember there's 2 billion iPhones out there, right? Yes, you designed one phone, but there's 2
yeah,
billion people using it. So it's one of those things where getting charged up about that engagement with people and seeing
yeah.
how your creation can improve upon not only their lives but society more generally. That's
Right.
that's that's the north. I mean, that is the why I get up in the morning,
Yeah.
is to really see how might I improve upon the lives of the people around me. Right.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. That is amazing. You are an amazing individual. Thank you so much, Wayne, for being on the show today. Thank you so much for bringing, bringing empathy to life and really looking at it from a whole different perspective,
Yeah.
and how we could apply it in all areas of our life, and how it really, plays a role in everything we do, and how we could break it down, and it could actually help improve our lives if we break it down properly. So, thank you so much. This has been an enlightening conversation. I really learned a lot from it, and you are an amazing individual. And I thank you so much for being on the show.
I appreciate that. Thanks you so much for the compliments, Stacey. I'm very humbled by you saying that. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks so much for the opportunity. It was great talking with you.
Thank you so much. And you have a great day.
Yep. Thanks.